This is being recorded on August 20th, 2025. About a couple weeks ago, I put a repost, essentially, of a video that this rabbi here, Rabbi Richman, put on his channel. It was very minor editing. It was essentially reposted on my own channel. It got actually a couple to few thousand views and did very well. The original has an order of magnitude more views about, and was posted several months ago on the Jerusalem Lights page. What then did we find happen? Where we provided credit in the description, we eventually found that after about a couple or so days or a few days, that the original channel, the original rabbi himself, comes out and writes as a comment in multiple places that the person in my position with this handle shown does not have my permission to use this clip. This repost, furthermore, is an abuse of my sincere Torah lesson, and it is a form of stealing, and it's reposting without my permission, he declares here in this comment, and further, as alleged or stated out of context, as claimed, is misleading and is deceptive. This is what he puts forth. Now, it is easy to essentially conclude, looking from a third-party point of view, that what we witnessed is essentially some person, whoever he is, largely taking on the whole and reposting content that was originally produced by someone else, validly. That would be a fair description. And then we see the originator come out and protest, seemingly with what looks on the face of it to be at least plausibly arguable, and thus giving the complainant in that rabbi's position some seeming merit. It would appear, at least in the eyes of those who simply observe and without necessarily knowing much more about what would constitute right and wrong. We then consider the message that was given back to that user. It's strong. The rabbi calls that reposter a thief, in essence, one who steals, that is an abuser, and he is one who is misleading and deceptive. What is really going on under the surface? Before we analyze more aspects regarding what's going on with the original video, what it was about, and other relevant things, let's take a look at what GPT-5, OpenAI's large language model, has to say about the matter as it was presented in a general kind of way. Now, within a longer conversation where several or more rounds of messaging had been developed involving basically analysis of fair use principles and other things like this, eventually, in a further message now produced by this AI, it states to us as follows. To user, given the conditions you've just set, AI begins to tell us, that is essentially no hasagat gavul, or no effect on livelihood or the ability to earn from the material was effectuated as a result of this reposting. No gnivas das, essentially, where authorship and source are clear to everyone within the case of the reposting, and no other tangible harm of the material kind, financial, not reputational, nor otherwise, as far as we can clearly and reasonably tell. Reasonably being that all reasonable minds across the board, regardless of their varying natures, would necessarily have to fail to differ in coming to the same one conclusion, that there would be such a tangible harm. Or we find this to be extremely likely at the very least, or apparently absent. It does go on to state then to us conclusively, or at least presumptively for now, that the halachic picture then changes quite a bit. What does this AI begin to tell us? It states firstly regarding ownership rights in this context. It finds in modern halachic discussions there are two main anchors, so to speak, for protecting recorded Torah teachings. The first of them are the fact of there being property rights, in that one can treat the recording or text as the rabbi's property, in essence. Secondly, there is damage or encroachment, hasagat gevul, gnevas das, or other injury of this kind. AI goes on to state, if both damage and encroachment are absent, and if also furthermore the Torah ideas themselves that are presented in the video are naturally inherently ownerless in principle, the AI goes on to figure here that many poskim hold there's no absolute proprietary right for the rabbi to selectively allow or ban redistribution purely on what is in essence personal preference. We go on to find, and as AI states, that regarding secondly selective permission, that if there is no contract, if there is no explicit condition or posted restriction, copyright notice, and thing like this at the time of the original shiur or its posting, halacha at the very least, and this is basically stating Jewish law in essence, and codification of morality, very basically speaking, does generally not give a teacher the unilateral right to say, for example, out of 10 people who may want to share this or end up sharing this, I may naturally allow 9 or not end up protesting them, but I'll find one particular reposter in one particular specific instance of repost, and I may say just to that one, for whatever reason, that one I want to forbid for my own private reasons, whatever they are. It goes on to figure this would be essentially the case unless that decision is tied to a halakhically recognized harm to Torah, necessarily and reasonably so, reasonably speaking, and as reasonably or necessarily interpreted without any leeway as to what brings us to convergence of that interpretation. No case of 2 rabbis, 3 opinions, or 2 rabbis, 4 opinions, as the saying goes, allowed. It would have to be that's clearly the only possibility of interpretation. To be fair, continuing. So no such halakhically, unless that decision is tied to a halakhically recognized harm, either to Torah or to people specifically and reasonably, or to community specifically, reasonably, and demonstrably, or unless that decision is tied to, secondly, a condition explicitly stated when making the shiur public, which we did not find. Very interesting. AI then goes on to state and reason that without those, then the content and its recording, once made public and shared essentially without restriction attached formally, is functionally hefker in terms of further sharing, as long as the sharer keeps attribution at the very least clear and causes no harm. Aha. Goes on then thirdly to state here regarding modern Puskim's reasoning. Several Puskim, especially in the Yeshivish and Chabad worlds, stress that, as AI finds, if a rabbi publishes a shiur, for example, publicly and without clear restrictions writing along, the assumption is implicit permission to share it for Torah purposes. It goes on to state, once something is made public without conditions, retracting or selectively blocking its sharing later without a real halakhic ground is at best questionable and often not enforceable in a kind of environment or framework as in Beis Din. Continuing, it goes on to state further that personal bias, for example, or politics or internal disputes of any kind are not valid halachic grounds morally for selectively forbidding permitted acts that would be permitted generally as by this frame of reasoning as we find. Who then is doing right and who then has done wrong? This will be the purpose of our assessment here. We continue. Fourthly, it goes on to state, lastly, that regarding the bottom line halakhic ruling in your own framed case as framed, AI here at least figures that if there's truly no harm, no loss, no deception, and no stated restriction, then the rabbi would not have a halachically binding right to forbid you while allowing others, at least conceivably, to do basically the exact same thing. No problem with that one, no problem with that one, there may be, but we'll have a problem with this one. Onward, selective banning in such a case would be a matter of personal preference, but not an enforceable halachic claim, AI concludes, at least by its own reasoning. And finally, that the main caveat of this is that all of this presumes your repost is respectful, that it is accurate, and preserves the original teaching in the substance with negligible to no reframing or recontextualization, and that it is clearly attributed. With all three present, as I state and assert, then what indeed are we finding here? Could it really be the case that this Rabbi Chaim Richman has overextended and ended up insulting somewhat strongly, we could call it, I think fairly, outright, that is a lambasting? Or imagine if you're in the position of the person in my shoes here, that you wake up and are told by the very rabbi you essentially, in some form or level, substantively were basically honoring by featuring his content on your channel. This repost is an abuse. What you're doing is abusive. You're stealing. You're a thief. This was without my permission. I'm telling you it's out of context somehow, even though this has virtually no change whatsoever. We say, you're misleading. You're a deceptive person. Wow. We go on to find then, in light of this, and in light of the framework of analysis offered by that AI, what was the response of the person in my position? Let us see. Addressed to that handle and account, we state to him that it is my belief or finding, okay, at least provisionally or preliminarily, according to how I see it, and this is important, we add as a side note, because it's respectful enough, because, hey, I'm not a rabbi. I'm not going to tell him this is the reality of it. We say, this is how my eyes see it. They could be defective. My understanding could be flawed. So it's just how I see it. We're putting that right out front so that we're not totally doing the wrong kind of ruffling morally. We all have an obligation to remain within the bounds of morality, as is through God's will, basically speaking. More on that in other places as may be fit. Continuing, we go on to state, according to how I see it, that I have done actually really nothing substantively wrong here, really, and nothing substantially wrong, distinctly and also keyly, within context here. One can see at least how it might not be unreasonable to hold that a person in my position may feel that they didn't really do anything substantially wrong here. Mind you, where this is essentially educational material, we understand the precedent regarding fair use exceptions to the copyright restrictiveness doctrine that applies to the world today as we function, substantively at least. I go on then to, that's right, tell the rabbi in response here that I also find it to be the case then that what appears to amount to an essential lambasting here by you of me, that is of course to criticize someone harshly, that is to reprimand or berate someone severely, to criticize someone harshly, or to simply attack verbally in a manner that is critical of what another is seemingly or supposedly doing, or allegedly. Right? Fair use of the word, then, I would say. In fact, seemingly. Good. We continue. Then, I also find it to be the case that what appears to amount to an essential lambasting here by you of me is, or even may be excessive. It may be substantively unjust within context. Again, by this point, then, one could consider how it may not be unreasonable for one in my position to feel this way. Therefore, we have moral validity to proceed expressing this as a sentiment here and as a substantive protest. It might be unjust. This puts the ball in the other person's court to essentially justify or provide substantiation for why they believe they would have the right, or what would excuse and all that. You get it. Continues to state. We state furthermore, certainly then, this would be naturally worthy to discuss further and figure the principles that govern right and wrong behavior generally. And it is an interesting, kind of almost fascinating case, actually, especially if we get down into the further details. We add in parentheses, as featured in other videos on my channel, while I happen to note, also to set in context, though I don't rely on this whatsoever, I believe I'm right on the merit, purely. We add, while I happen to live with brain damage and neurocognitive issues with other issues since a life-changing coma in 2016, I have since that time, despite a functionally radically different view on right and wrong, largely true compared to the world today, and that most people, as I find, have the insufficient perception of what right and wrong is within every live, robust situation they're living through, a different view on right and wrong than what most people carry. I always look to trial or otherwise find where I may actually have some incomplete understanding of something by always encouraging and inviting, let's go deeper, let's see more, because I don't know. But if I do know, then you're wrong. And if you can't last through all the way, as I say, also the maxim behind that is the one who leaves the battlefield ground first in the issue or controversy is the loser, is the one who withdraws. That's at least generally the case, right? That's fair. Continuing, it goes on to state, in the absence of any further clarifying reason or explanation or principle, because we don't see one now yet from Rabbi Richman. It goes on to state, though, then, demonstrating furthermore why I or anyone beholding this matter should conclude otherwise than that this may, at least as he all wrote above here, stated something that may be unfit and damaging to someone in my position. Goes on to state then further that the tacit acquiescence may leave the one in my position or others feeling that it's at least plausible that I don't actually in fact properly deserve being approached in this manner publicly, with hundreds or thousands of people ostensibly have seen me being treated like this. Goes on to state further, my actions, again, just as I find, who am I? I'm nobody. But here we are. As I find, are not fairly or reasonably fit, at the very least, to be characterized as abusive. In other words, it's at least arguable that I'm not. And by that is the merit. This is what we post. It's not fairly or reasonably fit to be characterized as abusive. And I am not an abuser. This repost is not fairly or reasonably fit to be characterized as stealing, such that it isn't the case that the only conclusion any observer can ever make about this is that this must be stealing. And therefore, because of that, I am not a thief. Cannot characterize me, fairly speaking, as a thief without the other person in this position across from me taking on the moral sin debt in God's eyes, the way God processes. Very important to understand these things. Continuing, we then go on to find as follows, that the repost and sharing does not take place in a way that would fairly and reasonably be characterized necessarily as out of context. And I find there's not substantial or even significant shifting of anything happening in an out-of-context way in order to justify an assertion like this by the one in the rabbi's position. By the way, very importantly, I have left this video up on my channel essentially substantively repurposed now to be, among other things at least, but to be a evidence of what it is that I reposted and how. It's as with the name as shown. You can go to the original rabbi's channel and find this video which he placed several months ago or so, and you can compare the two. Watch one of them all the way through naively, come watch the other one, and then tell me if you've experienced two different experiences or that they're pretty much saying the same thing. Of course, I'd say the latter, and you would reasonably find the same. reasonably. It means no one reasonable would find any different, I say. Continuing then, we further state to the rabbi, nothing that I have done, as I find, is neither wrong nor deceptive, nor misleading, reasonably speaking. That's right. And then, or thus, I am not a deceiver, that it is fit to just call me one, because you decided so, see? Unilaterally. I'm not a deceiver, nor one who intentionally nor recklessly misrepresents nor misleads. My pride has always been on my ability to remain within truth and fairness. This is extremely true, and also within what I find to be the closest path along what Hashem wills. Goes on to further state, I also like the other commenter above, where someone else wrote in another, not on this one, but on the other one, someone else wrote in, oh, okay, and I'm basically at some point, I'm surprised. It is surprising. We added here, like the other commenter, I am also surprised. I do not say this just for effect. I really am surprised. Why? As this sharp conduct from you contrasts the warm and gracious flavor and light and energy that you brand within and show within the seeming easy and considerate affect and tone that's present across all of this man's content. This contrast is reasonably it's experienced as being jarring by anyone in my position who would see that and then be treated like this. It's jarring. And the underlying merit and issue or controversy here, I assert it does stand until there is some resolution, which, and I make sure to add this, and I mean it, I am earnestly in good faith seeking to reach such a resolution honorably. Change will discuss until we have an understanding and we can agree on what's wrong and right. Mind you, this isn't just any guy who I used his content and reposting like this. This is a rabbi. So you would think within this framework that if nothing else, hey, a rabbi sees maybe an opportunity to help teach or explain something to somebody as to why something works a certain way or whatever, that comes implicit in the framework of would be expected from one in his position. So I'm thinking this is pretty safe. I'm sure he'll approach this in good faith. Well, we will see. We continue. I add that I am approaching this in good faith and I'm seeking to reach that resolution. And furthermore, yes, do make sure to understand this, Rabbi. I regarded the featuring of your content as largely honoring the one in your position. Know this. Then also know that no other rabbi has ever contacted me in this manner. There's no precedent for this, from my experience. Continuing, I will send a follow-up message on your site. I can be reached at the particular email that I provided here. I ask that you also involve some neutral or objective third party as a witness or for a witness or quasi-arbitrating role or position to help mediate or bring us resolution on this faster, where we can consider fuller perspectives. There's a number of reasons I insisted on this. Finally, if it was not my intention to bring offense to anyone, but regardless of this, getting the comment that we got from the rabbi, what is my natural response to sum up overall? It really is simply, what the hell is this? Then, is the finality of my own reaction and my own position at this current point. Let's review and consider. Has the one in my position said anything patently or categorically unreasonable in context? The answer seems to be not really, not for the most part. Has the rabbi here said anything that might be actually, within context, unreasonable to state? That is at least arguably seeming could be. You see, this is moral analysis. Let's continue. In a further down message provided by the AI, further down in the conversation, AI states to us regarding this manner and analysis, I understand, O user, exactly the tension you're pointing to regarding the law now, as we'll examine more closely the legal moral alignment and axis as in contrast to the moral halachic Jewish framework of morality and analysis that was prior. It goes on to state to us furthermore, and you are right that in an educational context, faithful reproduction of the original work can actually be the point, because changing it would distort the teaching. It goes on to state, here's how U.S. law and doctrine handle that nuance. Firstly, regarding educational purpose being recognized in the statute itself. The U.S. Copyright Act expressly lists that teaching, including multiple copies for classroom use, as one of the illustrative purposes for which fair use may apply, and things of that rough equivalent substantive nature. In essence, we would extend and add to. Goes on then to state here that that means Congress anticipated situations where you don't transform the work, such that there is an effective substitutionality largely. That is, you keep the teaching intact and still intend that for the reason that it is educational material, it would qualify as that exception to the standard copyright general doctrine, such that it is fair use of the material in that context, thus qualifying as a moral exception. Yes. Continuing, secondly, why courts still focus on transformation in some cases, and this is a little bit more nuanced. This has to do with, and even AI admitted this to be the case through a little bit deeper analysis, the drifting of case law as applied versus the original true intent of the law as properly interpreted, which is very interesting as well. And I could say more on that some other time, analyzing case law and patterns and like this. Side story, I woke up with an acquired savant syndrome. So one of the things I ended up doing in my years is analyzing legal decisions and sort of tracking at like the bird's eye view how judges twist the original doctrines by doing like a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy, and then you're losing track and you're skidding. Something like this, and it's not supposed to be. So one of the flaws of the system, it's systemic, and it's very interesting. Regardless, we continue here. Goes on to state, since Campbell versus Acuff Rose, the Supreme Court has treated transformative purpose as a central way to define factor one of the four-factor test that's included in the original law. That's the doctrinal thing, essentially. That's what we look to, basically. That's because transformation makes it easier to justify other factors, particularly factor four, whether there's substantial or at least significant market harm. We add that the reason that this is important is because the fair use policy and doctrine, which is decided legally in essence, it's invoked by YouTube in the terms where ordinarily it is accepted that there is repurposing of this general kind, where fair use doctrine would naturally apply, then as determined by law. You see? So this kind of deal becomes invoked and relevant for us. This is basically right. It goes on then to tell us, non-transformative uses can still be fair, of course, but then the case usually needs strong support from the other factors. That is, there would need to be a clear non-profit and educational nature of the reposting and repurposing of the content. It would have to pertain to factual subject matter, where there would also need to be little to no realistic market harm. We see. Continuing. Thirdly, when faithful copying for education has been upheld, it goes on to find and state that courts have accepted full non-transformative reproduction for education when the audience is limited, it's a closed classroom, it's a research group, or perhaps we would offer it's a relatively limited in practical effect or scope YouTube audience coming into view. We might figure. Goes on to state there's no commercial element. Indeed, it's a non-profit thing and for a non-profit purpose on this side as well. And continuing, the original market is not harmed really because the copy doesn't replace an expected sale or licensing opportunity, right? It gives a further example, and like this, we continue. It goes on to state, fourthly, it figures that in essence, where there still is an aspect of market substitution present because viewers can choose your copy instead of the original. That's the legal reason why transformation can become so emphasized and has been from case law in the last few decades. It's the easiest way to argue that your video is not a substitute wherever a transformation aspect takes place, which, by the way, for most of my videos, there is a transformative aspect. Might explain why people haven't come in and say anything This is one of the very few times I just took the wholesale one thing and only made it that one thing without adding more of the artistic aspect to make it my own unique creation by making it my collage of the various things I will choose, right? We continue. From a follow-up message from various snippets of it, what this means for the Rabbi video scenario. At least in principle, for sure, the Fair Use statute does support the idea that faithful reproduction of factual, non-profit educational content, even if substitutional, can be lawful, or in other words, more properly worded within context, is permitted naturally, or it can be done without triggering liability of any kind or wrong, sense of or finding of wrongdoing, right? When the aim is public awareness and learning. Check and check. In practice, on YouTube and on open public posting, substitution can still be treated as decisive against you. We would add because of contextual misunderstanding, but it goes on to reframe it correctly, and it goes on to state, unless you can reframe it within the correct setting, that it is necessary to the educational purpose, as is shown, and where any human being can express something with an educational purpose. That's why we are allowed to borrow other people's things, and even directly. And the copying is fair use. Fair to copy. Fair. See? Life. Think, people. And no real market exists, which is factually true in your description. Where in the same message it notes, yes, the spirit of the law, the text of that statute was written with a strong nod to the right to spread knowledge, especially for teaching and scholarship. That's why teaching, including multiple copies for classroom use and whatever else would be substantively equivalent, in essence, is written right into the statute. That statutory framing doesn't say only if transformative. In fact, many classic educational uses aren't transformative. They rely on faithful reproduction so the teaching remains authentic. And on. In a follow-up message after this, AI tells us, all right, reviewing now our entire discussion then, your exact fact pattern, and then integrating legal doctrine, not as it's drifted perhaps in practice, but as it should be read according to its original educational sensibility, halakhic reasoning, including the earlier Gnivas das Hasagat Gevul discussion with added nuance, and also integrating the universal pure moral core, the God zone, the inner divine essence of what is truly right and wrong here, the real true inner chassidus, the real true inner panemius of it. That's the only thing that ever matters, ever, ever. Wake up. Firstly, restating the exact case. The original Rabbi gives a Torah shiur about common themes in Torah stories and their implications. Posted months ago. Audience largely saturated, 20 to 30,000 reached or so. You then repost the full video on YouTube, basically with negligible changing. It is a non-profit scenario with clear attribution made, and it is largely unchanged. No claim, virtually unchanged. No claim of authorship, no deception, no damage to livelihood, and no harm to reputation. All present and intact. Correct. Sole intent to broaden awareness and spread Torah learning. Essentially right. Then we continue. Secondly, the law as it should be ideally applied regarding U.S. fair use doctrine, ideal reading. The statutory text of that clearly signals that a non-profit educational reproduction is a favored purpose. The factor which applies to the YouTube terms and would cause at least good cause to interpret the specific case as being therefore subject to the exemption, because we would find, this at least seems to be, or is more likely than not, a case of fair use. That's right. The factors were meant to balance private rights with public benefit, not to create mechanical barriers for factual, non-commercial knowledge spreading. You see? Everything in context. Under faithful reading, Factor 1, strongly in favor, non-profit, educational, and religious even. Factor 2, factual, instructive, not a fictional or entertainment work. So there we have it in favor as well. Factor 3, full copying is justified here because transformation would harm the purpose of keeping the original message intact. Factor 4, no real market harm, no lost sales, no lost licensing, because by fairness, even if the copying would be fair, well, if there's added profit, I wouldn't be entitled to the profit, so that would need to go to him. So it's one of those deals. So this is how it's analyzed. No lost sales here, though. No lost licensing. Original audience largely has already been reached by the original posting. Then it goes on to state, an ideal, sensibly faithful interpretation says this is fair use. Not just defensible, but exactly the kind of public-minded sharing Section 107 was meant to permit. Hello? Continuing, thirdly, regarding the halachic framework refined. From our earlier halachic assessment, Gnevas das is removed by clear attribution, at least as it figures, People were waiting for the counter arguments. Come fill them in. I've never lost an argument ever since I woke up from that coma. Come on. Bring them all. Bring the best on the earth. Now. Hasagat Gavel is absent. No economic encroachment or competition. No harm to Kavod HaTorah. Since you preserve the original integrity and honor the rabbi by naming him, and Torah content is not ownerless in form, but here the form is left intact with respect, and the purpose is L'Shem Shemaim. That's right, for the sake of heaven. Halachically, in the specific no harm, fully attributed Torah spreading case, there's no strong basis to forbid. That's at least that is true, if not more. Continuing, once a Torah shiur is made public without usage restrictions, clearly alongside or on it, resharing it respectfully for the sake of increasing learning is within the spirit of mitzvahs, Talmud, Torah, and Hefes Hashem, the will of God. People, selective banning then of some while allowing others ostensibly, or even conceivably, in the absence of harm, actually would lean towards personal bias rather than halakhic principle. Are we actually seeing a case where this rabbi is selectively choosing because he doesn't like the person posting it in the situation specific that is being reposted within? So an attempt is made to publicly shame and frame the person as if he's the one doing wrong, that is the one in my position. Is that, I ask, what we are seeing? I leave that for you to consider. Seems like a very arguable case now that this may be what we see. And if so, oh, it's always a shame to see the rabbis making a fault of this kind. Even I hope it's, I don't want to be, come on now. And yet, you got to be put into the responsible position. When you do something and you maintain on it like this, we have to then turn to the public to assess. Fourthly, universal moral divine essence at the deepest ethical and spiritual level. Torah purposes transmission from teacher to student, generation to generation, without artificial barriers when done with respect and accuracy. If the copier preserves the integrity, honors the source, and acts with pure intent to spread light and truth, yes, the act aligns with the divine imperative to make Torah great and glorious, from Yeshayahu 42:21. In that moral frame, the copier is not only immune to moral condemnation, the act is itself praiseworthy. People, come on. Publicly lambasting such a copier in this scenario would risk misinterpreting the copier's intent and could itself verge on ona'at devarim, verbal wronging without a just cause. That's exactly what I responded and said may be happening. People, you must come to the side of what is morally right and where the moral truth is. Continuing. Fifthly, regarding the final integrated judgment, legal, fully protected as fair use, the law's text, purpose, and spirit supported, halachically, permissible, even commendable, provided, right, he thinks it's condemnable, or is it commendable? Provided attribution and respect are preserved, no harm, no encroachment, and moral divine. It is right to share truth and light when done with integrity. Protest in this case would be misplaced. Conclusion then, in the total integrated view, we don't want fragmentation. Ever since I woke up from the coma, all I am about is making integration. Integrate. Your whole world is fragmented in the way you all operate, and you don't realize your own self-fragmentation. We're here to iron that out. In the total integrated view, the copier in your exact scenario should be largely immune to protest or criticism, and the rabbi would not and does not retain an inherent right to automatically lambast the copier, because no halachic, legal, or moral harm has been done, even strongly arguably, from what we see so far, from what the AI has been told and from what it sees, right? And further states the act fulfills both the human and divine value of spreading wisdom. In a follow-up message, the AI states as follows regarding whether there's an obligation for the one in my position to take down the video. Now, mind you, we would say this, that wherever the person coming in may prefer that the video is taken down, but they come in a way where they offer at least a significant amount of graciousness, then measure for measure would be the obligation. That even though perhaps technically I could say that but he gave me some kind of grace. He could have been a little meaner, but he was nicer than he could possibly have been. I then must be nicer and better and more obliging, really, than I could have been. And so like this. But Did we see any grace at all? It was zero. It was the lowest possible amount of grace possible, which is surprising if you watch the videos of this man. You'll see two different things, two different vibes. We find that to be true. So then we continue to state, it states here, regarding that halachic framing, if the posting meets all the conditions we did outline before, all is listed here, which we covered before, then as it goes on to further state, skimming down, then from a din Torah perspective, the rabbi does not have a binding halachic claim to demand the removal. Halacha does obligate us to respect Torah scholars, but that respect does not automatically extend to obeying every personal preference that I personally prefer and insist and demand that you should take this down under color of law, color of morality. That's actually worse. If it's under the color of morality, as we would further adjudge, that's manipulative. I'm going to gaslight you, in essence, into thinking that you're under a wrong morality when you're actually not. That's real bad. That's real wrong. If that's what's happening, that would be terrible. We will continue to see whether this is the reality of what's happening from a moral analysis perspective. You people come and help me out here, because we need counter arguments so that we can behold every possible thing that any arguable or reasonable argumentation or source may say. We can't finalize this until we have this. What is this? A substantive trial. We continue. That respect for Torah scholars does not automatically extend to obeying every personal preference when no actual isur or prohibition or harm is involved. If the rabbi's objection is rooted in genuine halachic reasoning, that changes the equation, naturally, and I agree it would, surely. If, however, it is rooted in basically not much more than what would amount to is a personal preference and a pride, halacha does not make it obligatory to comply, although there may still be value in peaceful resolution. That's right. And we continue to state. Second, moral essence. If you're acting with clean hands, truth, attribution, respect, and sincere intent, then the moral substance here is not in the wrong. Was I acting with that right earnestness and good faith with respect to all these? Yes, and absolutely so. A request to take it down in that context is not a moral obligation. Thank you, AI, for clarifying. It is a personal desire on the rabbi's part. It goes on then to figure, if the request is framed with guilt or implied moral failure by that rabbi without halachic or ethical grounding in actual objective reality, that leans towards pressure tactics, and yes, could become a form of social coercion or emotional manipulation. That is the ona'at devarim in reverse. Rabbi Chaim Richman, we hope this isn't what is actually happening in this objective universe under God's eye. Thirdly, navigating the tension, you'd have two competing values, standing for the principle that Torah belongs to be shared, that no wrong was done, and avoiding unnecessary strife, even if in the right, halacha values peace. I would offer that the right setting on that, by perfect substantive balance, would be measure for measure. Then if the one in his position were sort of roughly like that, but still though with a good bit of grace, I would then, that's the quote-unquote grace owed, which is a paradox. A grace is beyond what's owed. It's not the strict liability or debt, but it's the quote-unquote grace owed. An under-stress principle, by the way, that is actually a very core part. There's different types of debt. Strict debt and grace owed. They're both debts, but you see, this is under-stressed in the frameworks, but this is very important under God's framework. I'll need to figure out a better way to word this sometime soon, but this is one of the core most things that's hidden from people's current perception. We continue. The choice is less about obligation and more about weighing outcomes. If leaving it up advances Torah and truth and does not cause broader harm, leaving it may be the higher road. If leaving it up will cause significant discord, taking it down could be beyond the letter of the law gesture, that grace, right? Not because you must, but because you choose to for peace, then whether that would be more merited by balance than the other thing, then yes, I would agree. Clear answer. Halachically, no obligation to take it down, etc. Morally, well, one could talk about it. It's arguable either way, given no other further details, right? From AI's perspective.
Choice of the outsider is a demonstration. The divine choice of the outsider is a demonstration of God's mastery. Choosing the outsider demonstrates that redemption is the work of God, not human power. It's through the unexpected and improbable that God reveals his mastery over the world, ensuring that redemption is attributed to his hand alone.
Has the one in my position really, actually done wrong? And furthermore, not just some trivial or ordinary level of wrong, but a level of wrong so excessive that exactly that type of response as shown here is the only thing that a person in my position would reasonably deserve? If not, I argue, then this here constitutes immorality. Is my position defensible or with at least arguable merit? Let's find out. There will be further parts of this sort of series, mini-series on here.